Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will not be long. I rise to add to this conversation, I hope, to contribute to this conversation, because, as I was listening to the honorable member who led the debate and the member who followed him, it occurred to me that Barbados is in a position today that we, for a very long time, wished to be in. And that position is one where we dare. Is one where we dare to actually test and try and step out into the world to find our fortunes again. I know this may sound like the beginning of a fairy tale or a story, but it's not. I'm being very sincere and very practical when I say this. Certainly for me, it felt for a long time, and they say that those of my generation are something called Xennials. We're not quite Generation X, and we're not quite millennials, those of my age. We happen to be in that cusp where we saw what no technology was like, and we came of age in a place where we had access to technology. So we know both worlds. So we can give a perspective from both positions. And certainly for me and those of my generation, for a very long time, Barbados felt like a taker of things other than price, like a taker of policy. We were waiting for people to tell us what to do. And very much aligned to this notion, to this expression that I will confess I don't have a lot of time for. And so you will know that there was a time, probably still is, when you would ask somebody how they're doing. And they would say, man, I hear poor, peaceful, and polite. And I really loathe that expression, sir. Because it says to me that we feel like we should just be content with this little lot in life. And not that there's anything wrong with being poor. And I've said in many fora, as someone who grew up working class and from a working class family, that there is no shame in poverty. But at the same time, I feel as if Barbadians, almost in our quality, had begun to feel, and a lot of it had to do with the way that we had been educated, because I feel as if we had been educated for a very polite civil service to say, okay, well, we're going to go and do the people's work. And Barbadians have shown that that is not who we are. We like to dare, and we like to try, and we like to innovate. And so in this area of work, there's a lot of innovation. And I feel as if a government who dares, a people who dare, will not always get everything perfectly 100% right on the first try. But we have to be willing to dare. Because if we sit and wait for people to always tell us what to do, then they're going to tell us what to do when it suits them. When they've already left us in a certain position and they've secured their first mover advantage, then they'll look back and say, oh, y'all could come now. And so we have to be willing to dare. Now, what we will not do as the group of people elected and appointed to care for the well-being of a country, what we will not do is take unnecessary risks with people's well-being. That is important. So one must dare, but one must do so responsibly and without taking unnecessary risks. And so I've watched the evolution of this work where, sir, much like with COVID, in many ways the whole world is guessing. And I feel like this legislation shows that Barbados is learning. It is taking note of the lessons, taking note in some cases perhaps of some of the missteps, which it wouldn't be unique in having made relative to any country that's in this sector, and all countries are in this sector. So it is from that perspective that I just want to share a little bit about what should concern us and what should not concern us with respect to this work. The honourable member who led, the member for St. James Central, spoke quite a lot about the international climate context and the climate summit, the annual climate summit from which he has just returned, and what the conversation and the mood there is about. Certainly finance and the way that the international financial architecture arranges itself to deal with the climate crisis is important. I would not want us to be too gleeful about the loss and damage fund and then so gleeful as to take our eyes off of the rest of the conversation. I think the establishment of that fund has been a landmark establishment and is critical. I think the idea of keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming alive is also critical. The commitments that we made under the Paris Agreement remain very important. So the issues remain important, the issues of finance for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the issues of finance for adaptation, so making sure that countries like ours can withstand today the increases in warming, and finance for loss and damage. The fact that we already have historical loss and historical damage from what has so far transpired. So all of those conversations are very important. The macro level finance conversations are very important. The question, for example, of whether we can redirect fossil fuel subsidies away from where they are towards some of the work that we need to do, all of that is critical. In my own work, sir, in this area, and my own work over the last 2 years with other countries, with other institutions outside of Barbados, there's something else that is also critical. And that is the whole idea of green industrial policy, which is what we're talking about today. How are we really going to be effective in bringing about this green transition that we're talking about? And the green transition really is moving from this reliance on fossil fuels to being able to fully embrace and use renewable energy technologies like solar and wind and so on. Now, the whole issue of the green energy transition is not just about having countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and embrace renewable energy technology. One of the things that you will hear a lot is this notion of a just energy transition. A just energy transition. Because in everything that we do, the thing that we focus on has to be equality. It has to be about whether at the macro level, at the country level, whether countries are being left behind, and at the individual level, whether people truly will end up with affordable access to energy. That's the conversation, you know. We are not here trying to pass any exam to say, well, by this year, we've reduced our emissions. By this year, we are only reliant on renewable energy because it is some artificial target. The honourable member for St. James Central, who's paying such rapt attention as I speak, has said to you in his intervention, what Barbados stands to gain economically, financially, socially from this transition. And so it's not just a question of, because the world has said that this is the direction we're going, we're following. There are real gains. There are real ways in which we can make people's lives better, but we have to keep our finger on that button of making people's lives better and getting cheaper energy and more reliable energy for all. And in a minute, I'll tell you how a green energy transition can start to take place and that not happen. So the question is, what does this just energy transition look like? One of the ways that those of us who are working on these issues, that we feel it has to evolve, is that countries are not just takers of technology. That's easier said than done. But one of the things certainly is that we do not just look, for example, to the EU and to the US to develop the technology according to how they want to develop it, to create all of the high-value jobs there in their geographical space. And then the rest of us say, oh, thank you so much for creating this wonderful thing, we will pay you for it. Countries of the Global South have to be involved in the actual transition to the new technologies, creating access to jobs and everything involved in that advantage. Because you're not going to tell me that you made your billions during the Industrial Revolution at the expense of our air quality and of our people and the exploitation of their labor, and then you're going to leave us behind again when we come to this new industrial revolution, one that is a green industrial revolution. It can't happen twice, surely, sir. And so the question is, how do countries like ours, how do countries in the Global South really participate in that? That's one level. But the other that we are concerned with here today is the question of whether there's equality in ownership of the renewable energy projects and whether people will end up with more reliable energy for which they pay less. That's the question. And so this government has determined that in order to bring some order to the mad scramble to get in on this sector, it will go the way of these competitive bidding programs, which we know as auctions. That's really what it is. And auctions, as we all heard from the honorable members who spoke earlier, are really now the go-to method for moving to utility scale capacity to generate renewable energy. Now, in my short intervention, I just want to say a little bit about, from an economic perspective and really in this space, what this has generated across the world. Because auctions are not new. Competitive bidding, first of all, this is just procurement. This is a procurement method. Countries all over the world have been procuring things for years, including the government of Barbados. So this is not new in that regard. And price has often been used as the deciding factor in these auctions. So you determine who has the best price in order to determine who gets the award. And that is true, sir, of most procurement. It is not the only procurement method, but a lot of our procurement is based really on best price. And so the idea is that on the basis of this price-based procurement, when you're focusing on price, a country is able to drive down the price of these renewable energy technologies and therefore drive down the cost of energy to the consumer. The idea is, so the competitive bidding is an auction. And so it is really one in which price is the focus. And I mean, the point of auctions really is to be able to have some transparency. It's called price discovery. What does that mean? It means that everybody has to put on the table what their price is likely to be. So the idea is that you're trying to avoid collusion. You're trying to make it very clear in a context of limited resources that a government has. You're trying to get everybody to show their hand as far as price is concerned. This is something, I mean, I first started hearing about competitive bidding for renewable energy probably around 2006, 2007. So this is something that has gone on for a very long time. But the idea is that if you are able to make price very transparent, that is going to drive down the cost of the projects. That is going to drive down the cost of the projects. It's going to drive down the costs of the technologies and the implementation of the technologies. There needs now to be another transmission mechanism, another pathway by which driving down the cost of the project to execute means driving down the cost of energy to the consumer. One does not necessarily follow the other unless we are very careful to make sure that that happens. Now, when it comes to the question of the cost of energy to the consumer, I think that governments often have to determine whether they are going to try to address the direct price to the consumer or whether they're going to say, look, the consumer is going to benefit indirectly because the state will be paying less for fossil fuel. Every government has to decide that. Some determine that the cost of energy to the consumer is farther out of their hands than they can have an impact on, and the focus is going to be reducing the fossil fuel bill so that the savings that we make, we use to invest in health and education and housing and making people's lives better. That is a decision for the government to make. Because one does not follow necessarily from the other. Driving down the price of a renewable energy technology does not always, although it should, but does not always lead to a reduction in the cost of the energy generated from the execution of that project. So that is something that we have to keep our eyes on. But the bigger concern in the literature, the bigger concern in the research and in the work that some of us are doing on these matters is whether auctions lead to market concentration and market dominance. What do I mean by that? If you are a large firm, a large energy producer, a large producer of renewable energy technologies, chances are that you are extremely competitive on price because you are executing projects in different places. And so that allows you to be far more competitive than a smaller operation that has higher operating costs as a percentage of their profits and so on. And we know this, we see this all the time. We see this in any industry. And so the concern for those, for development economists like me and others is, wait a minute, is focusing on price going to mean that we only allow some of these larger operators? It becomes a question of ownership. I know that ownership is very important to this Barbados government. Ownership, economic enfranchisement are the things that for us make a difference in a small economy like this. Ownership matters. It is not just a question of getting a wage, it is being able to have control of an asset that can generate value over and over for you. Ownership of a home, ownership of land, ownership of any investment instrument, ownership matters. And so, to the extent that this government's renewable energy plan focuses on ownership, focuses on the democratization of the sector such that individuals are able to own renewable energy assets like solar PV on their roofs and generate income from it, then we have to be concerned about whether auctions contribute to market concentration of larger firms that come in and say, well, I got the best price. And I'm putting this on the table because this is the concern. I'm putting this on the table now because somebody next week, the following week, even as we speak, is thinking about it and saying, but hang on, these auctions sound suspicious. And so a lot of work has gone into looking at whether, in research, looking at whether these auctions really are a problem for market concentration. South Africa has been doing this since 2011, and there are those who might say South Africa might not be the best example because South Africa has significant load shedding issues now, which mean that there are power cuts all the time and energy security is a problem. But South Africa, Denmark, Zambia, Colombia, these countries have been dealing with auctions and using this approach for a long time. And they've taken the time, as the honorable member for St. James Central suggested, other people have walked this road before, and it is not that they're going to dictate to us what to do, but certainly we would be silly not to learn some of the lessons. And so there are some lessons to be learned. Countries like Zambia and Germany and Colombia tried to deal with this issue of market concentration, and they ended up with higher prices for projects. So let's confront the issue squarely. The price question is important. The price question is important for Barbadians who are looking to transition to electric vehicles. Because I talked to some of them who are not sure that the economics, the finances are going to work out for them. And so that is why I talk about the boldness of a government, to be able to step out and say, look, we're going to test these waters and see. We're going to do some forecasting and see. Is the price to the consumer going to be lower or not? And we're going to come, like the member for Christchurch, he said, and just put the information on the table, and you can determine. So I wanted to move very quickly, sir, to the fact that a lot of the research shows that there are ways to avoid these challenges. The work on South Africa showed that there are ways to avoid the happening or the likelihood that using an auction means that only large firms come in. Because again, small society, your mandate is ownership and enfranchisement. You want to make sure that you're not walking in the right direction. And I'll say this. I am happy that this government has attracted the interest and the partnership of those whom it has attracted. And we always need to be in a position to critically consider what is being put before us. And so, notwithstanding all these partnerships, which are tremendous, we always need to be in a position to say, well, I thank you for this information. We have determined that A will work better than B for us. And so design of the auction is key. So what has been found to work well from a design perspective is, one, to have a schedule of auctions. That is going to sound very obvious, but predictability and information is what often makes your design better. It often makes sure that people can't collude. It makes sure that people can't rig their bids and so on. Schedule of auctions. A schedule of things is important in lots of sectors. Some would argue that a schedule of maintenance of buildings is important. Some would argue that a schedule of road works and repairs is important. The more information you put into the public domain, the less is the likelihood that people will make economic mistakes based on the fact that they didn't have the best information. Volume disclosure on what each project is likely to produce is important. So a schedule of auctions, when these things are happening, who is likely to be involved, volume disclosure, the price ceilings that the honorable member for Christchurch East made reference to, those are very important. in avoiding people getting together and rigging their bids so that one or the other can come in and be successful in the project. I mean, I don't want to sound paranoid or suspicious, but the whole business of procurement and economic management is exactly what the member for St. James Central opened his remarks with, is to avoid a certain mischief that just sometimes attends to these things, because government is the good faith actor here. Government must be the good faith actor. But that's not to say that every actor is a good faith actor, and government has to play that role. Penalties for those who do not come to the auctions in good faith. The rationalization of administrative procedures. We all know that the easier it is to enter into a process and to leave it, the more likely that process will be effective and successful. And then the question of making information available to prospective bidders and to other stakeholders. Sir, I wanted to enter the conversation in this particular position because I feel that there will necessarily be a discomfort with a new approach. It is not enough to say Germany has done it, South Africa has done it, US has done it. It's not enough, because those who are looking on will feel that Barbados is different and is special, and we have to protect it. But if we shield ourselves so much from the rain, if we lock ourselves away in a bunker so that we don't get a little sprinkle, we won't know when the sun has come out. And so, while I understand that this may seem like a new approach, I wanted to be able to give some perspective from my own work on how countries have done with it. The fact that for several of those countries, they have had to change design and change tack. They have had to set up, for example, officials and colleges of negotiators and peer review councils that will actually look at what some of the international institutions are suggesting and consider whether it works for our context and what are some of the additional things that we might consider for Barbados and for this part of the world. So, sir, I support the direction of this government in this regard. I encourage the forecasting and the forward planning because I think that there has to be a balance of acknowledging that this is a new sector and that some things you will learn from its evolution, but also doing as much planning and monitoring of market activity as you can. Our market right here is very small. You can, when I say small, I mean you can cast your eyes left and right and up and down and see how the market is moving. And I think that the lesson here is that we perhaps strengthen our market surveillance to see what is coming on stream and what does that mean for 2 years, 5 years, 7 years down the road. I think that is a lesson here. I think it is well learned, and I think it will only serve to strengthen the work of the sector going forward. I support this amendment, sir, and with those few words, I'm obliged to you.